everyone, I'm Lucas. I work with Aka and Eliza as a machine learning engineer.
Yeah, maybe we start. Maybe we go this way.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ruben. I also work at Eliza and work here as a data engineer / machine learning engineer.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Surya. I work with Ika, Lucas, and Ruben as well at Eliza. I'm a machine learning engineer.
Hi, I'm Melbourne. I did a Master of Data Science at Monash and did a minor thesis on deep reinforcement learning, so that's why this interests me.
Hi, I'm Florence. I'm French. I don't speak English very well.
We'll try our best. Just ask if you don't understand something.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Maggie Zhang. I work for NVIDIA as a deep learning solutions architect. And before NVIDIA, I was studying UNSW. So any question related with NVIDIA GPU, if you use GPU to do training, you're welcome to ask me. We can have a discussion. This one? I don't even use my laptop for that.
Hey!
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a university student at Federation University. I'm in my final semester of my master's.
Nice.
Hi everyone, my name is Bala and I'm doing my master's in computer sciences at Federation University.
Hey, I'm Daniel. Been working in the States for the last few years at a machine learning company, doing data science, data engineering, kind of helping them grow. Just got back, but working remotely with them.
Hi, I'm Andrew Buttery. I'm doing a Masters of Data Science part-time. I work full-time for a financial services company that will go unnamed. And I'm interested in this stuff because it's all just very cool and fun. And yeah.
Hi, I'm Adam. I just graduated from a bachelor's in computer science in Canada. And I'm here in Australia for a year. And I'm started doing some self-study in like machine learning and AI because I didn't get to do that much in my bachelor's. And hoping to do a master's and have a career in this kind of field.
Well, Piotr, do you just quickly want to add who you are?
Piotr, yes, I also work in analytics and yeah, I also like the field. It's quite interesting, exciting, and yeah, those things are happening right now, so it's great to be part of it.
Right. So, without further ado, I'll kick off the this interview or this short sort of video essay by Jaron Lanier. And as I said, we don't have to watch this thing and just be quiet until he's done. If you agree or disagree or have a question about this, feel free to just stop me and I'll hit the pause button and we can talk about it. And the same goes for you on the web. Hello there. I'll try my very best to keep an eye on possible questions in the chat, and so that might also contribute to a more interesting discussion. Here we go.
A lot of us were appalled a few years ago when the American Supreme Court decided out of the blue to decide a question it hadn't been asked to decide and declare that corporations are people. Now, that's really a cover for making it easier for big money to have an influence in politics, but there's another angle to it which I don't think has been considered as much, which is that the tech companies, which are becoming the most profitable, the fastest rising, and the richest companies with the most cash on hand, are essentially people for a different reason than that. They might be people because the Supreme Court said so, but in addition, they're essentially algorithms. If you look at a company like a Google or an Amazon and many others, they do a little bit of device manufacture, but the only reason they do is to create a channel between people and algorithms, and the algorithms run on these big cloud computing facilities. And so the distinction between a corporation and an algorithm is fading. So does that make an algorithm a person? And so here we have this really interesting confluence between two totally different worlds. We have the world of money and politics and the so-called conservative Supreme Court, with this other world of what we can call artificial intelligence, which is a movement within the technical culture, we could say, to find an equivalence between computers and people. And in both cases, there's an intellectual tradition that goes back many decades, but previously they've been separated, they've been worlds apart. Now suddenly they've been intertwined. So this idea that computers are people has a long and storied history, which I don't think I'll go into right now, but it goes back to the very origins of computers, even from before. There's always been a bit of a question about whether a program is something alive or not, since it intrinsically it has some kind of autonomy, at the very least, or it wouldn't be a program. So there has been a subculture that's, I would say, the dominant subculture that's been the most wealthy and prolific and influential subculture in the technical world, that for a long time has not only promoted the idea that there's an equivalence between algorithms and life and certain algorithms and people, but a kind of a historical determinism that we're inevitably making computers that will be smarter and better than us and will take over from us. And that mythology, in turn, has spurred a kind of reactionary, perpetual spasm from people who are horrified by what they hear. And so, you know, you'll have a figure say, oh, the computers will take over the earth. That's a good thing because people had their chance and now we should give it to the machines. And then you'll have other people say, oh, that's horrible, we must stop these computers. Most recently, some of the most beloved and respected figures in the tech and science world, including Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, have taken that position of, oh my God, these things are an existential threat, they must be stopped. In the past, all kinds of different figures have proposed that this thing will happen using all kinds of different terminology. And some of them like the idea of the computers taking over, and some of them don't. What I'd like to do here today is propose that the whole basis of the conversation is itself askew and confuses us and does real harm to society and to our skills as engineers and scientists. To me, that a good starting point might be the latest round of anxiety about artificial intelligence, which has been stoked by some figures who I respect tremendously, including Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk. And the reason I think it's an interesting starting point is that it's one entry point into a knot of issues that can be understood in a lot of different ways, but I think it might be the right entry point for the moment because it's the one that's resonating with people. So the usual sequence of thoughts you hear is something like, so-and-so, who's a well-respected expert, is concerned that the machines will become smart, they'll take over, they'll destroy us, something terrible will happen, they're an existential threat, whatever scary language there is. Now, my feeling about that is it's a kind of a non-optimal sort of silly way of expressing anxiety about where technology is going. The particular thing about it that I think isn't optimal is the way it talks about an end of human agency. It's intrinsic, but it's a call for increased human agency. So in that sense, maybe it's functional. But I want to go a little deeper in it by proposing that the biggest threat of AI is probably the one that's due to AI not actually existing, to the idea of being a fraud, or at least such a poorly constructed idea that it's phony. In other words, what I'm proposing is that if AI was a real thing, then it probably would be less of a threat to us than it is as a fake thing. So what do I mean by AI being a fake thing? What I mean by that is that it adds a layer of religious thinking to what otherwise should be a technical field. now, if we talk about the particular technical challenges that AI researchers might be interested in, we end up with something that sounds a little duller and makes a lot more sense. For instance, we can talk about pattern classification. Can you get programs that recognize faces, that sort of thing? And that's a field where I've been active. I was the chief scientist of a company that Google bought that got them into that particular game some time ago. And I love that stuff. I think it's a wonderful field, and I think it's been wonderfully useful. But when you add to it this religious narrative, that's kind of a version of the Frankenstein myth, where you say, well, but these things are all leading to a creation of life, and this life will be superior to us and will be dangerous. When you do all that, you create a series of negative consequences that really undermine engineering practice and also undermine scientific method, and also undermine, I think, the economy. So the problem I see isn't so much with the particular techniques, which I find fascinating and really useful and am very positive about, and I think they should be explored more and developed. But the mythology around them, I think, is really destructive. So I want to go through a couple of layers of how I think the mythology does harm. The most obvious one, which I think everyone in any related field can understand, is that it creates this ripple every few years of what's sometimes been called AI winters, where there's all this overpromising that AIs will be about to do this or that. It might be to become fully autonomous driving vehicles instead of only partially autonomous, or it might be being able to fully have a conversation in order to only have a useful part of a conversation to help you interface with the device. There's this kind of overpromise that then leads to disappointment because it was way premature, and then that leads to reduced funding and startups crashing and careers destroyed. And this happens periodically, and it's really a shame. It's hurt a lot of careers. It's helped other careers, but it's been kind of random where you fit in the phase of this process as you're coming up. And I think it's just immature and ridiculous, and I wish that cycle.
Can I quickly ask a question? And maybe this is unfair to you. Do you notice that in terms of GPU sales or demands or anything like that? Is that a thing that you can confirm? Does that really happen in a significant way? Sorry,
I'm not sure.
Totally put you on the spot.
So I definitely heard of like at least demand for GPUs going up in like recent years.
Yeah.
And, the prices going up.
But I would have imagined like as people get like disappointed and then I was gonna do AI but now I'm not.
I think it's not a good measure because I think people are buying those to mine the bitcoins and
yes,
alike.
exactly.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, that's true. So there's AI way
exactly. So that's not really AI.
Sure, it's not a And here I thought AI was the most important.
I think there are probably more people mining Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sure.
Am I wrong to say that GPUs were only really used in the way that they are in the most recent boom of AI? I mean, I don't know all of my history, but
I don't know when
still
the Bitcoin thing started.
Bitcoin is maybe 2-3 years ago, but still more for
2014
gaming.
or something.
In terms of the
so that's when the different boom sort of
about
started.
our
Before, I don't really
in
know
terms
what I
of
was
the
using, but
percentage,
it
I
wasn't
think
like
gaming is
GPUs.
more than
But GPUs still,
50%.
there was
Right,
still
okay.
demand for them, right?
Yeah.
Because I do remember
the AI-driven demand, maybe in like the most recent AI boom.
Yeah, because when I did my physics degree, we did an astrophysics conference, and RMIT here in I think it was RMIT, was a bit of a laughing stock because they bet on GPUs. That's not a supercomputer, And right. I think they came out with the last laugh, at least at the moment, right? Because they got a machine that's way more efficient at what it does than all these supercomputers that we got all around the country that would take 10 times, 20 times as long.
Really?
I think for a similar procedures.
But I think the important thing is the purpose of it, right?
Right,
GPU
yeah.
has a specific purpose.
Yeah. So it's I guess it's a very specialized super fast thing as opposed to a very general
supercomputer in
yeah. So
I also heard that there was I don't know the specifics, but I heard there was some kind of what's it called? Like machine learning specific GPU variant that came out maybe like a year ago.
What is that? Is that from a video?
Well, no, I heard about it.
I didn't know this.
So you
part.
don't mean TPUs? That's not. Is that?
Yeah, maybe it's
maybe,
like
I'm
about
not actually
TPU.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Because
What were TPUs?
TPUs are.
Google's.
Yeah, they're Google product, I guess. Is TPU? So does everyone? Is TPU just a name for the general
Oh, you're right.
idea, or is that a Google product?
No, it's a
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, is
sort
it?
of an interfaces or something like
Yeah.
which we regularly uses with electronic devices like or something.
Yeah.
That's
So it's a tensor processing unit. I just wasn't sure whether it was something that Google had just
Like,
copyright, and they were like the Kleenex of GPUs or something.
Yeah.
It gave it a special name.
Yeah. Is that what it is, or is it different?
I think no, they're different. They're meant to be specialized on tensor operations. And so
But no
like
one else
deep
can
learning.
make them either. They are
Right, because it's like Google's.
So, so they're both.
It is both. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a
Yeah.
new strain, but also
Yeah.
very much just Google.
Yeah. So Google made a special toilet paper that no one else knows how to do. Sorry, Google. Please don't
watching
watch
us
my
right now.
special edition.
We're streaming on YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh, we broadcasting
They
this?
already know. Yeah, sorry. That's why I meant. I'm sorry.
Oh my god, I didn't know that.
Are you allowed to be here?
Yes, I'm allowed to be here.
Listening to this guy.
But I just have to be cautious what I
Yeah,
will
sorry.
say.
Look, I can always. It's currently public, but I can always make it private later. I've edited a couple of episodes.
Yeah, we
because of
can
that.
discuss more after.
So yeah.
Well, education can't be revealed.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But anyone who knows me can see why I chose this guy to for this particular
Be shut down.
discussion.
Surely, and that's a widely shared criticism. I don't think I'm saying anything at all unusual. Now let's go to another layer of how it's dysfunctional. And this has to do with just clarity of user interface, and then that turns into an economic effect. So people are social creatures. We want to be pleasant. We want to get along. We've all spent many years as children learning how to adjust ourselves so that we can get along in the world. So if a program tells you, well, this is how things are, this is who you are, this is what you like, or this is what you should do, we have a tendency to accept that. Now, since our economy has shifted to what I call a surveillance economy, but let's say an economy where algorithms guide people a lot, we have this very odd situation where you have these algorithms that rely on big data in order to figure out who you should date, who you should sleep with, what music you should listen to, what books you should read, and on and on and on. And people often accept that because there's no empirical alternative to compare it to. There's no baseline. So it's kind of bad personal science. It's bad self-understanding. I'll give you a few examples of what I mean by that. Maybe I'll start with Netflix. So the thing about Netflix is that there isn't much on it. There's really a paucity of content on it. If you think of any particular movie you might want to see, the chances are it's not available, at least streaming is what I'm talking about. And yet, there's this recommendation engine, and the recommendation engine has the effect of serving as a cover to distract you from the fact that there's very little available from it. And yet, people accept it as being intelligent because a lot of what's available is perfectly fine. Now, the one thing I want to say about this is, I'm not blaming Netflix for doing anything bad because, I mean, the whole point of Netflix is to deliver theatrical illusions to you. So this is just another layer of theatrical illusion. So more power to them. I mean, that's them being a good presenter. What's a theater without a barker on the street? I mean, the whole thing, I mean, that's what it is, and that's fine. But it does contribute at a macro level to this overall atmosphere of accepting the algorithms as doing a lot more than they really do. Now, in the case of Netflix, the recommendation engine is serving to distract you from the fact that there's actually not much choice anyway. Now, there are other cases where the recommendation engine is not serving that function because there is a lot of choice, and yet there's still no evidence that the recommendations are particularly good because there's no way to compare them to an alternative. So you don't know what might have been. Now, if you want to put the work into it, you can play with that. You can try to erase your history or have multiple personas on a site to compare them, and that's the sort of thing I do, just to get a sense. And I've also had a chance to work on the algorithms themselves on the backside, and I think they're interesting, but they're vastly, vastly overrated. But then I want to get to an even deeper problem, which is that there's no way to tell where the border is between measurement and manipulation in these systems. So, for instance, if the theory is that you're getting big data by observing a lot of people who make choices, and then you're doing correlations to make suggestions to get more people. If the preponderance of those people have grown up in the system and are responding to whatever choices it gave them, there's not enough new data coming into it for even the most ideal or intelligent recommendation engine to do anything meaningful. In other words, the only way for such a system to actually be legitimate would be for it to have an observation it could observe who were not being guided by its own by its own recommendations. Otherwise, it simply turns into a system that measures which manipulations work as opposed to which ones don't work, which is very different from a sort of a virginal and empirically careful system that's trying to tell what recommendations would work had it not intervened, right? I think that's a pretty clear thing. But what's not clear is where the boundary is. So if you ask, is a recommendation engine like Amazon more manipulative or more sort of a legitimate measurement device? There's no way to know. At this point, there's no way to know because it's too universal. And the same thing can be said for any other big data system that recommends courses of action to people, whether it's the Google ad business or social networks like Facebook deciding what you see, or any of the myriad of dating apps or anything. All of these things, there's no baseline, so we don't know to what degree they're measurement versus manipulation. And then that in turn, and by the way, as I said, with Netflix, in a lot of cases, the services that these things are offering are kind of intrinsically, let's say, they're supposed to be kind of, dating always has an element of manipulation, shopping always has an element of manipulation. I mean, in a sense, a lot of the things that people use these things for have always been a little manipulative. There's always been a little bit of nonsense, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing or the end of the world. But it's important to understand it if this is becoming the basis of the whole economy and the whole civilization. If people are deciding what books to read based on a kind of a momentum within the recommendation engine that isn't going back to a virgin population that hasn't been manipulated, then the whole thing is spun out of control and doesn't really mean anything anymore. And so it's not so much a rise of evil as a rise of nonsense. It's a kind of a mass incompetence as opposed to Skynet from the Terminator movies. That's what this type of AI kind of turns into. But I'm going to get back to that in a second. And now, to go yet another rung deeper, I'll revive an argument I've made previously, which is that it turns into an economic problem. The easiest entry point for understanding the link between the sort of religious way of confusing AI with an economic problem is through automatic language translation. So if somebody has heard me talk about that before, my apologies for repeating myself, but it has been the most readily clear example. So for many decades, well, 3 decades, the AI world was trying to create an ideal little crystalline small algorithm that could take 2 dictionaries for 2 languages and turn out translations between them. And intellectually, this had its origins particularly around MIT and Stanford, and back in the 50s, because of Chomsky's work, there had been a notion of a kind of a very compact and elegant core to language So it all, it wasn't a bad hypothesis. I think it was a legitimate, perfectly reasonable hypothesis to test. But over time, the hypothesis failed because nobody could do it. And then finally, in the 1990s, researchers at IBM and elsewhere figured out that the way to do it was with what we now call big data, where you get a very large example set, which interestingly we call a corpus, called a dead person. That's the term of art for these things. And if you have enough examples, you can correlate examples of real translations, phrase by phrase, with new documents that need to be translated. You mash them all up, and you end up with something that's readable. It's not perfect, it's not artful, it's not necessarily correct, but suddenly it's usable. And you know what? I think it's fantastic. I love the idea that you can take some memo, and instead of having to find a translator and wait for them to do the work, you can just have something approximate right away, because that's often all you need. So I think that's a benefit to the world. I'm happy it's been done. And I think it's a great thing. But the thing that we have to notice, though, is that because of the mythology about AI, the services are presented as though they're these mystical, magical personas. IBM that makes a dramatic case that they've created this entity that they call different things at different times, Deep Blue and so forth. The consumer tech companies, we tend to put a face in front of them, like a Cortana or a Siri. And the problem with that is that these are not freestanding services. In other words, like if you go back to some of the old AI experiments from philosophical debates about AI, thought experiments from philosophical debates about AI from the old days, there are lots of experiments like, if you have some black box that can do something, like it can understand language, why wouldn't you call that a person? And there are many, many variations on these kinds of thought experiments, starting with the Turing test, of course, but through Mary the color scientist and a zillion other ones that have come up. But this is not one of those. What this is behind the curtain, literally millions of human translators who have to provide the examples. And the thing is, they didn't just provide one corpus once way back. Instead, they're providing a new corpus every day, because the world of references and current events and slang actually does change every day. So we have to go and scrape examples from literally millions of translators, unbeknownst to them, every single day to keep those services working. All right, so then, the problem here should be clear, but just let me state it very explicitly. We're not paying the people who are providing the examples to the corpora, which is the plural of corpus, that we need in order to make AI algorithms work. So in order to create this illusion of a freestanding, autonomous, artificial intelligent creature, we have to ignore the contributions from all the people whose data we're grabbing in order to make it work. And that has a negative economic consequence. So this, to me, is where it really becomes serious. Everything up to now, you can sort of say, well, look, if people want to have an algorithm tell them who to date, is that really any stupider than how we decided who to sleep with when we were young before the internet was working? Doubtful, because we were pretty stupid back then. So I doubt it really could have that much negative consequence. But this is all of a sudden a pretty big deal. If you talk to translators, they're facing a predicament which is very similar to some of the other early victim populations from the particular way we've digitized things. It's similar to what's happened with recording musicians or investigative journalists, which is the one that bothers me the most, or photographers. What they're seeing is a severe decline in how much they're paid, what opportunities they have, their long-term prospects. They're seeing certain opportunities for continuing, particularly in real-time translation. But I should point out that's going away soon too. We're going to have real-time translation on Skype soon. But the thing is, they're still needed. So, there's an impulse that I think is a correct impulse to be really skeptical when somebody bemoans what's been lost because of new technology. And the usual thought experiment that comes up for that, or the point of reference, is the buggy whip. You say, well, you wouldn't want to preserve the buggy whip industry. But translators are not buggy whips because they're still needed for the big data scheme to work. So they're the opposite of a buggy whip. And what's not happened here is translation hasn't been made obsolete. What's happened here is the structure through which we take the efforts of real people in order to make translations happen has been optimized, but those people are still needed. So this pattern of AI only working when there's what we call big data, but then AI using big data in order to not pay large numbers of people who are actually contributing is a rising trend in our civilization, which I think is totally not sustainable, because big data systems are really useful. There should be more and more of them. And if that's going to mean more and more people not being paid for their actual contributions, then we have a problem. Now, the usual counter-argument to that is that they are being paid in the sense that they too benefit from all the free stuff and reduced cost stuff that comes out of the system. I don't buy that argument because I think you need formal economic benefits to have a civilization, not just informal economic benefits. That's the difference between a slum and a city, is whether everybody gets by on day-to-day informal benefits or real formal benefits. And the difference between formal and informal has to do with whether it's strictly real time or not. So if you're living on informal benefits and you're a musician, you have to play a gig every day. If you get sick or if you have a sick kid or whatever and you can't do it, suddenly you don't get paid that day. Everything's real time.
Might add that he says that because he knows it. He is a musician, and he's one of those weird jazz musicians that has one of every instrument. He has, I've seen him play a couple of things that I didn't even know existed before he brought them out. He collects exotic instruments, and he's been on records with many famous jazz musos and world musicians. So he knows what he's talking about. He's been getting by on nothing but music for a while. He's recorded some interesting albums.
And if we were all perfect immortal robots, that would be fine, but as real people, we can't do it. So informal benefits aren't enough. And that's precisely why things like employment and savings and real estate and ownership of property and all these things were invented to acknowledge the truth of the fragility of the human condition, and that's what made civilization. So AI, if we talk about AI as a set of techniques, as a field of study in mathematics or engineering, it brings benefits. If we talk about AI as a mythology of creating a post-human species, it creates a series of problems that I've just gone over, which include acceptance of bad user interfaces where you can't tell if you're being manipulated or not, and everything's kind of ambiguous. It creates incompetence because you don't know whether recommendations are coming from anything real or just self-fulfilling prophecies from a manipulative system that's spun off on its own.
The internet, the AI is failing us. They found out that we're listening.
What's a buggy whip, by the way?
Yeah, what is it? I imagine, I'm not a native speaker myself, so if we've got anyone
like the horse and carriage. Right?
Yeah, that's what it
pretty
sounds
sure it's like when you like walk the horses and stuff
yeah.
like that. So they can go faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a particular job? Was there like a driver and then someone who was just using his with a big right arm, small left arm, just whipping that horse? Yeah. That would be.
No, we usually have both of the things. No.
Oh!
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
Two
I don't know.
arms.
Yeah, I have this steampunk idea in my head where you have a sort of just an arm that automatically steam-driven just whips the horses while you go.
That's the real danger zone.
Yeah, that was weird. So if you ride on a horse by yourself, you have a little box with like steam-driven box on your back. And of course,
why on your back?
It is just
because you're on a horse.
Because you're on a horse, and it's probably warm, so you want to insulate it from you and the horse. And so then, of course, in this chase against the bad guys, because it's a movie scene now there's bad guys, and they chase you down, and of course you're going to run out of water or fuel or something to whip the horse faster, as they close up or something. And that's the cliffhanger. So it's good.
An economic negativity because you're gradually pulling formal economic benefits away from the people who supply the data that makes the scheme work. So for all those reasons, the mythology is the problem, not the algorithms. Now, So, so now, just to back up again, I've given 2 reasons why the mythology of AI is stupid, even if the actual stuff is great. The first one is that it results in periodic disappointments that cause damage to careers and startups and all. You know, it's a ridiculous seasonal disappointment and devastation that we shouldn't be randomly imposing on people according to when they happen to hit the cycle. So that's the AI winter problem. And the second one is that it causes unnecessary negative benefits to society for technologies that actually are useful and good. The mythology brings the problems, not the technology. But now, having said all that, let's address directly this problem of whether AIs could destroy civilization and people and take over the planet and everything. And here, I want to suggest a simple thought experiment of my own. Let's suppose, and there's so many technologies I could use for this, but just for a random one, let's suppose somebody comes up with a way to 3D print a little assassination drone that can go buzz around and then kill somebody. And let's suppose that these are cheap to make. Now, I'm going to give you 2 scenarios. In one scenario, there's suddenly a bunch of these and some disaffected teenagers or terrorists or whoever start making a bunch of them, and they go out and start killing people randomly. And there's so many of them that it's hard to find all of them to shut it down, and there keep on being more and more of them. That's one scenario. It's a pretty ugly scenario. Then there's another one where there's some kind of so-called artificial intelligence, some kind of big data scheme that's doing exactly the same thing, that is kind of self-directed and taking over 3D printers and sending these things off to kill people. The question is, does it make any difference which it is? You know, the truth is that the part that causes the problem is the actuator. It's the interface to physicality. It's the fact that there's this little killer drone thing that's going around. It's not so much whether it's a bunch of teenagers or terrorists behind it or some AI. That part is, or even for that matter, if there's enough of them, it could just be an utterly random process. You know, the whole AI thing, in a sense, distracts us from what the real problem would be. The AI component really would be only ambiguously there and of little importance. So this notion of attacking the problem on some sort of autonomy algorithm instead of on the actuator problem is totally misdirected. So this is where it becomes a policy issue. The sad fact is that as a society, we have to do something to not have little killer drones proliferate. And maybe that problem will never take place anyway. But what we don't have to worry about is the AI algorithm running them, because that's speculative. There isn't an AI algorithm that's good enough to do that for the time being. And the problem, an equivalent problem can come about whether or not the AI algorithm happens. So in a sense, it's a massive misdirection. This idea that some lab somewhere is making these autonomous algorithms that could take over the world is a way of avoiding the profoundly uncomfortable political problem, which is that if there's some kind of actuator that can do harm, we have to figure out some way that people don't do harm with it. And there are about to be a whole bunch of those, and that'll involve some kind of new societal structure that isn't perfect anarchy. And nobody in the tech world wants to face that, so I think we lose ourselves in these fantasies of AI. But if you could somehow prevent AI from ever happening, it would have nothing to do with the actual problem that we fear. And that's the sad thing, the difficult thing we have to face. I haven't gone through the whole litany of reasons that the mythology of AI does damage. I think there's a whole other set that has to do with neuroscience, where if we pretend we understand things before we really do, I think we do damage to science. And not just because we raise expectations and then fail to meet them repeatedly, but because we confuse generations of young scientists. So just to be absolutely clear, we don't know how most kinds of thoughts are represented in the brain. We're starting to understand a little bit about some narrow things. That doesn't mean we never will. A retort to that sometimes is that there's some sort of exponential increase in our understanding, so we can predict that we'll understand it soon. To me, that's crazy because we don't know what the goal is. We don't know what the scale of achieving the goal would be. So to say, well, just because I'm accelerating, I know I'll reach my goal soon, is absurd if you don't know the basic geography which you're traversing. Because as impressive as your acceleration might be, reality can also be impressive in the obstacles and the challenges it puts up. So we really just have no idea. This is something I've called in the past premature mystery reduction, and I think it's a reflection of just poor scientific mental discipline. You have to be able to accept what your ignorances are in order to do good science, and to reject your own ignorance, I think, just casts you into a kind of a silly state where you're a lesser scientist. And I'm concerned that I don't see that so much in the neuroscience field, but it comes from the computer world so much, and the computer world is so influential because it has so much money and influence that it does start to kind of bleed over into all kinds of other things. A great example is the Human Brain Project in Europe, which is a lot of money, a lot of public money going into science that's very influenced by this point of view, and has upset some in the neuroscience community for precisely the reason I described. So one of the things I find really interesting about this is a sort of a social and psychological phenomenon that has been going on for some decades now, where a core of very technically proficient, very kind of digitally minded people reject a lot of the world of traditional religions and superstitions and want to come up with this other framework, but then recreate versions of those old religious superstitions for the technical world that are just as confusing and just as damaging in similar ways. And to my mind, the mythology around AI is a recreation of some of the traditional ideas about religion, but applied to the technical world, and all of the damages I've just talked about are essentially mirror images of old damages that religion has brought to science in the past. There's an invocation of a certain kind of threshold of this thing we call intelligence, or a new kind of personhood that, if it were to exist, would have all this power, might have a supreme power that exceeds people. And this notion of this particular threshold that can be achieved, that this particular thing, which is sometimes called the singularity or superintelligence or all sorts of different terms in different periods, is very similar to a certain kind of idea about divinity. Not all ideas about divinity, but a certain kind of superstitious idea about divinity, that there's this entity that will run the world, that maybe you can pray to, maybe you can influence, but it runs the world and you should be in terrified awe of it. And that particular idea, I think, has been dysfunctional in human history. I think it's dysfunctional now in distorting our relationship to our technology, and it's been dysfunctional in the past in exactly the same way, only the words have changed.
So the thing that comes to mind for me in that regard is my parents are both Freudian psychoanalysts. So what if we are just trying to recreate mommy or daddy in computer form? That would be my take on it, or at least sort of, being brought up that way. That would be my thing. But then again, who knows? That might be what's underlying religion in the first place. I found that really interesting that we've come back around to this when he first started talking about assigning personhood to corporations, and then the corporations being mainly present in our lives as the outputs of their algorithms. And so their algorithms becoming, in a way, already this relatively a legal person, I suppose, in some way. But at the same time, that's not the kind of iRobot, that's not the kind of AI that we would all hope for. Or I don't know if we all hope for that, right? But it's not the kind of sort of AI that you would hope for. I guess that you would maybe want around your kids, sort of thing, right? It's not the sort of thing that you would want to meet if you were a spacefaring explorer and you come to a planet with an AI, and the only sort of level at which you can communicate is the way that we can currently communicate with the AIs and the functions that we currently see in our AIs. So it's almost disappointing that we're moving. I hadn't looked at it that way before. Yeah, it's. that we're moving towards the robot or the AI personality, the artificial intelligence, in a way that puts the person first and then almost like sort of puts the intelligence in as an afterthought almost. Yeah, and this could just be a particular quirk of the US-American legal system. I don't know if it's the same here. I don't know if corporations have personhood in Australia. I don't know if what German legislation is like right now, or other European countries. I don't know whether corporations have personhood there. But in general, it's like we seem to think, at least that's my perception of it, we seem to think of many corporations as some kind of an entity of some sort. Like people say, I don't like Google, yeah, as if that's genuinely a thing. But it's a completely fictional thing. Like you could kill, if you will, Google tomorrow. Google could commit suicide tomorrow if they decided to dissolve tomorrow. Any company could do that, yeah. So this entity could just cease existing, and its existence itself only subsists because the people working in it and the people surrounding it believe in it. It's itself already it's not a fictional entity. That's the wrong word for it. But it's an entity that is manifest belief. It's not. There's no physical thing that is Google. There's no, like you often see this in like sort of 80s cartoons where you have like the crystal of magnanimity or something. But if you destroy it, then all evil is gone from this world or something. That's not how it works, right? There is no Daimler-Benz crystal. You don't have a central mainframe or something that you smash and then Daimler-Benz is gone. The entity would still exist and they could sue you for smashing their mainframe. Yeah. So I've thought that this was a really cool idea that I hadn't thought of in terms of what we think of and what we perceive as AI and where we're going in terms of our developments. Yeah.
Well,
oh God, please don't raise your hand. It's not.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you.
You're Canadian, sorry. I didn't.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm like not completely getting his idea, but I feel like he's conflating like multiple things into what he has constructed as like what people perceive AI to be. Like he's talking about one thing where corporations are entities or are treated as people.
Yeah.
And you were saying that we have this opinion on like what Google is like, but I mean groups have always existed. You know, you could say like I don't know, in the Middle Ages there was like guilds of things.
Yeah.
The guild is only like really a symbol and like what people talk about when they're all sitting in a room together, right?
Yeah.
That's not new at all.
No, absolutely not. And money, tribes, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's tons of things that exist just because we believe it, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't feel like that's really leading to like a societal change. These are just like the new players, right? They're just companies. We've always had companies. Like back in the old days, there was like Standard Oil.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think what I meant was that we are relying so much on the algorithmic output of these companies. Like Google is pretty much, it started as a search engine, right? So much of what we know as Google, what we perceive as Google, is like, you know, everybody knows this ad, like, hey Google, play flight facilities, yeah? And it's almost as if like other people are drawing on this. When there was an ad in the US, if I remember correctly, it was like a Burger King ad, I think, where they asked in the ad, hey Google, what's this thing about the new blah blah burger? And then of course if you had any Google Home product, it would activate because it heard it being called. Yeah. So we almost interact with this the same way, or with these legal persons in a way that you would interact with a person. That I thought was new. Yeah.
I
guess.
No, I just think like the underlying notion, what you're saying is basically like there's this concept of what an entity was, an organization, a group, an idea, right? And that's evolved over time for sure. But what it is and what he started with in the beginning was that like there's this algorithm and how that's becoming more overlaid onto this entity, so you're relying on this algorithm, right? But then there's another thing that I want to bring up, which was like there's two different streams here that he's talking about. He's talking about AGI, which is like the general, the singularity or whatever, and that's not what these entities are. These are based on like, and the other thing that he was saying, what he was touching on is like, there's no feedback system, right? There's no way to know if your recommendation system is good because you don't know what the alternative is, right? There's no feedback to actually assess the model. And at the end of the day, like, what is the optimization? What is the driving force? What is the success of the recommendation system is to get more user engagement, right? And then like, and that spurs its own issues and problems. We can go into that another time, but like, yeah, it's basically like there's there's the AGI, which he's talking about, and then there's also like the entity. I think what I don't like personally is that he's like overlaying it too much, because
I feel like
there's a
he has
flawed
multiple
artificial intelligence which doesn't have that feedback system.
Can I add a point between these two? Because humans are basically a complex system of cells and whatever bone marrow, all this sort of stuff. It all becomes one entity. I guess one entity. So in a sense, we're not really a human. We could say we're all parts, and then like Google is kind of like that. It's become so complex, so many parts to it that it's almost a human. Whereas a guild, maybe back in the day, it's like a few blood cells or something. It's like an amoeba kind of thing. So it's not really, you wouldn't consider it as a person, but Google is so complex now. With the algorithm, it's almost like basically a person. And what was I going to say? And I was saying with the recommendation system, it's like, unless you know yourself, then you won't really be able to know like if it's manipulation or not. Because like, in a sense, we are what we sort of are around, right? We're around our friends, we become them. So a recommender system is basically your friends, and that is actually who you are at that point. I mean, unless you know yourself to become something, then you can kind of say, I just like this or I like this.
He also acts as if like these recommendation systems live within a vacuum. Like it's based on what you've previously, either watched or like purchased, and like maybe they influenced you to watch or purchase some of those things. But ultimately that comes up from like what you like or what you like actually need in life, you know what I mean?
That's still a manipulation, right? It's like, it's perpetuating your own ideas of what you're going to engage in.
But I mean, it's not only the company that's like perpetuating. Like if I buy like notebooks on Amazon or something, like they didn't like, there's no company that forced me to buy notebooks, you know what I mean?
But they'll keep presenting you that.
Well, I know, but it's like, it's the kind of thing of like, you buy a washing machine and you get ads for washing machines. Like, I'm not going to buy another washing machine.
That's I guess the flaw that is in the algorithm, that it just doesn't understand that you just bought a washing machine and it's now
feedback.
But the thing I think is also like, when I watch anything on YouTube or something right now, I feel incredibly old, because I am, they almost cracked me. Like I'm gonna subscribe to YouTube Red or whatever it's called now, just so that the ads stop. I hate ads. And
ad blocker.
On a phone? Do I have to what's the name, jailbreak my phone or something?
Browsers other than Chrome have extensions on mobile devices.
There's also alternative YouTube plans that are.
Anyway, so I'll have to check whether there's a YouTube plan.
Don't let the entity win.
No. The thing is, I might have just simply been mistaken. I assumed that Apple was so beholden to capitalism that they wouldn't allow this undermining of capitalism in their platform. But I might just be underestimating Apple there.
They probably do things that they can.
Yeah.
Heard it.
But so the thing there is, I don't know what it's like to grow up in a world that has so much ubiquitous advertisement, and your brain, as it develops within this realm, within this world, within this realm of advertising. Because the moment you're sort of choosing your Heidegger, the moment you're thrown into this, with this vulnerable mind, and you grow up in it, how much of that, what you decide, like which notebook to buy or so on, is your decision, because you've been guided away from any of the, like, who knows what happened in your childhood to make you an Intel child or an AMD child. I remember when I was like first building my own computers, it was like sort of, are you with Intel or with AMD? Like which CPUs do you use? Like, and it was like AMD was the underdog and Intel was like the big evil and whatnot. And depending on who you spoke to, there were all these tribes, and I'm pretty sure that they didn't just develop because of people's, like they wouldn't necessarily have developed in the way they did if Intel and AMD hadn't done the advertising that they did, and the whole PC versus Mac thing in the same way, and I think that we're underestimating how much these kinds of recommendation engines or manipulation engines, however you want to look at them, are influencing your decisions in ways that you are not, you can't access.
But I feel like that's just every single decision you make ever, right? Like we like to think there's some sort of core part of ourselves that is us, right? That we are the ones making decisions, like some sort of soul or something. We've been sort of brought up in a society that has like influenced almost all of our thoughts regarding sort of the nature versus nurture thing. And I think nurture is a huge, huge part of that, whether that's sort of recommendation engines or any other sort of cultural influence. So I think using recommendations engines as sort of like a boogeyman is kind of like, I don't know, a bit short-sighted.
I
Such a huge part of it is just everything else. Like,
I take your point, but I think, let's say, you're essentially saying that we probably don't have a limited amount of free will because we're getting affected by a lot of other things in the environment. But in that scenario, pretty much a lot of the things that are influencing us are at most random. There might be some things which have have a motive. But in case of
how does that change the freedom of the will, whether they're random or directed from?
No. What I'm trying to draw a contrast between the recommendation engines and then what's happening naturally. Because in the environment, apart from let's say political ads, everything else is sort of randomish. But in terms of when you're looking at a manipulative recommendation engine, their motive is to actually maximize the profits or maximize the viewing time.
Is it really that important? As a kind of as someone who's being influenced, right? If you're being influenced by
I feel
random
like
decisions, if you're okay, this is the type of movies I like.
Yeah.
Whether you're influenced by some random process which makes these types of movies the sort of popular in your particular subculture, and therefore you like them versus any other method, whether or not that's kind of more satisfying towards you, as a kind of.
I think the issue is that you don't know that perhaps you don't like the movies that are being recommended to you.
Yeah, but you also if you've got friends who recommend them to you, how do you know that your friends aren't terrible recommenders and that's just the best that you've got so far?
I guess you're more likely to give feedback to your friends.
I guess if there's if the person knows what they're doing, if it's meant to be a manipulation, they should say, here's a this might not be for you, but this is what I think is good for you. I mean, Netflix could have that at the beginning. This is what we think you might like, but this may not be actually what you like. And that'd be kind of.
And your friend hasn't recommended it to you.
They already do that when
they
say people who bought this also bought that. They're not saying this is what you like. It's saying note that these other people bought these two things together.
And everyone here knows it's an algorithm, so
There are some
most
people
people,
who
except if you're growing up as a kid, then maybe that's when you're most vulnerable to.
I just don't feel like it's vastly it's not changing how we act more than just old-fashioned advertising does. We know who the information is coming from.
Old-fashioned advertising is any good.
I didn't say it's good. I'm just saying it's not different.
Yeah,
I think that's what I want to say. It's just a different medium. We have a short time spanning when looking at history. So when I was little, I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, there's this magazine for the gardeners." And actually was recommending products, but actually you had to pay for your product to show up there. It was no different. Or if you look at, let's say, the communist countries or that type of regimes where you had the propaganda media, they were just pumping all one message, which was just manipulation. So I think it's just always it's the mechanism and idea that someone was influence other people or groups. It was always there. It's just the means are changing. This is what we face now. The means are the algorithms and recommendations.
Yeah, exactly. So I still don't understand why he thinks this is a new thing that's vastly changing society. I think it's
I think the thing that we haven't done before, the thing that we haven't had before, is this God's eye view that we have now. Because if you look at advertising, which is gorgeous, it's adorable. In the 1930s and so on, you see advertising for tractors, you see all sorts of things, and a lot of the advertising is quite wordy. Yeah. So if you think I talk a lot, Jesus, you should read some of those ads. There are full-page ads that explain to you why this tractor is really good, and it literally it makes the case of a genuinely good product. It says this tractor breaks down very rarely and stuff like that. Whereas modern advertising, if they could mount a boob on the hood of the car and would sell more cars in Photoshop, they would do that immediately. Sorry, I didn't mean to. That didn't go so well. Anyway, but that's exactly it though. You make jokes, all of these timed things and all of this stuff, right? So, and you can A/B test for these things. So the Cambridge Analytica, I think, was the political equivalent of what has been going on in advertising for a long time. And we know so much more about psychology. We know so much more about statistics as to how humans react, like the good old, people are more cooperative if you hand them a warm beverage, all that kind of stuff. Because you don't need this individual. I don't need you to believe me right now. I just need to be convincing to enough people in the room. That kind of thing, right? And then enough people will buy my product. So we've never had this range, and we've never had this much data to get this kind of information and be removed from this immediate direct contact sort of sales pitch. Like we
I
don't
feel like
need.
we have for a long time. Like marketing has not been very direct for like since advertising has existed.
Yeah, but maybe our perception of long time is a bit different. I'm thinking about like more than 60 years.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So that I think in that case I think you're just a bit mistaken. It's just to say that politely. No, I think it's never been this efficient. It's never been this effective.
It's definitely never been this efficient. But I mean, they've had like market research and stuff that has made ads more and more targeted, and so now they're just slightly more targeted. You know what I mean?
Very much.
I think it's.
I don't think
they're very much more targeted.
I think it's both. Like before, it was easier to manipulate people, so like the tactics didn't need to be that great. But now it's really efficient, but people are getting smarter. So it's like you do need it to be
smarter or more cynical.
Well, because in the past we used to have the specifications which are hidden at the back. When we purchase anything, you need to go with the specifications in particular which you are looking for. Whereas nowadays the specification has come to the front end, like where the requirements need to be patched every tick, and then go on for the next one. That depends on the build stage and the specification and everything. There comes the contradictory. Like some people suggest that this one is like this and this one is like this. There the customers get confused and they are going for the alternate searches. Like that's what is happening with the older generations and now generations. Like that's what is.
I think, I mean, to his point and his concern, it's a more high-level thing. It's basically saying that there are these concepts and ideas about like neurons and like these algorithms that we're going to create, and the computer world has gone off and like utilized this in a really powerful and economic way. And the researchers had one thing in mind and believe in research and like testing and theories and trying it out, and whereas this other really powerful industry is just taking these ideas and using them in these corporation ways that like are very impactful, and them going off and using it causes that conflict.
Could you not also say the same thing about like psychological research that like marketing was based on? Like I'm sure the people who like studied human behavior, they didn't all imagine it being used to manipulate people into buying like toothpaste. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's kind of a similar thing. And I don't think that people are being exploited in such a different way than they already have been. So we're sort of like debating the merits of marketing and capitalism.
No, I disagree simply because I think there's a loss of control of like, and the scalability and the scale and just everything, the power of it. And that's where it comes back to like the laws that's passed on these companies as their own entities, which is really just a facade for this algorithm. So like that kind of, if we're just like cutting all the layers out and you're really just looking at the algorithm as the entity, like that's crazy. That's all.
I'm aware that, Maggie, are you okay with what we're talking about? Because I don't want to make you super uncomfortable because we're talking about corporations and you're here as a representative of NVIDIA. I would love to say something about this.
I work for a financial services organisation and we're not exactly top of the popularity poll at the moment. But coming to that is so you do have a choice. You do have control. It's called you turn your damn phone off. You don't look at stuff. If you don't want to make the trade of getting the information that you want for free, the cost is you have to see advertising.
I understand what you're saying, but like to draw an analogy to, let's say, like gambling, there's laws on advertisements for that. Like I don't think it's good enough to say like don't look at it, right? Like there's a responsibility for organizations, just like there is with the gambling advertisements.
And that's regulated because humans are subject to certain addictions, and those addictions are then detrimental to society.
Who says you can't be addicted to your phone?
Yeah.
I'm certainly addicted to my phone.
Yeah,
Well,
they've made the what is the WHO, like they're saying like now there is a actual an addiction or some.
Yeah.
So
there's an epidemic.
This is a whole different
disease
conversation around how we are classifying any kind of thing that's outside of very narrow ranges, an addiction or a spectrum or anything else. But it still comes back to you have the control.
And I'm also a little bit concerned that you're not including the data that's being delivered on the other side. So data being the new oil, yeah. I have to watch apps on whatever, and they're sucking my data out of my phone, yeah, my behavior and all of this stuff. So as a
Again, it's a trade-off.
No,
If you
but
don't- if you
yeah, no,
don't
no, no,
wanna
no,
give it to
no,
them,
no, no,
don't
no,
use it
yeah,
for them.
I've got a point to make there, and that is, if I give you $50, we both have an idea of how much that is, and if in return you give me a loaf of bread, then I will say that's a pretty expensive loaf of bread, yeah. But if I give you my data, yeah, last Christmas I gave you my phone, that sort of thing, yeah, I would have no idea how much that is worth. And we have no idea how much our currency, our interactive sort of everyday sort of actions are worth on the market. We don't know. So we don't know what we're trading. It's not necessarily that I'm not willing to watch ads if I know kind of what the trade really is, but this is the informal market that he spoke about.
You could fix that with actually creating a formal market. So basically,
But that's what he said, yeah.
ASX for data.
I
So,
think even on one of the previous meetups, we've done the back of the envelope calculation, and it turned out that if we divided revenue of Google by all the people in the world, or presumably using internet, it would be like $1 or $2. And then we should think about the cost of YouTube or Gmail or whatever, and that would be like a 20 a year at least. So then I'm thinking, okay, maybe I will stick to the current business model.
To play devil's advocate, like a company needs to run. Like I don't think we should be arguing about like how good the recommendation system is, and I think it's like you said, there's like some underlying concept of that's been consistent. I think it just comes back to the idea that like there is this huge amount of responsibility that's coming from like they should be held accountable simply from like the studies that have come out where you've got two profiles exactly the same, one male, one female, and on Facebook what's being targeted to them, what's being directed to them is actually bias. So we're like the responsibility in terms of the bias coming in.
But we all know that the bias is in the data. It's a reflection of human
Correct.
preferences. Now,
Of history.
Of history. And it becomes a question of, if that's wrong, fine, do we need to go into the data and fix it in some way? And I believe there's things like AIF 360 and other stuff like that that are attempting to do those kind of things. But you've also got at the same time take into account that if there's an economic benefit in not fixing it, it's going to be harder to do. Just
because the economic value outweighs the responsibility.
I was listening to a podcast around vegan food, as in like replacing meat with non-meat alternatives, so getting rid of factory farming. And there was a guy there who was saying, I think he was running the Finless Fish. He's saying change in society does not happen because somebody gets outraged. Change in society happens because somebody worked out there's a better way to make a buck.
Exactly, and that's the problem.
Yeah. We also see that that's not necessarily happening, because I was thinking already that if I owned all of the coal-fired power plants or whatever in Australia, then I would, I personally would buy a nuclear power plant, but that's a completely different thing. I would buy all the wind farms and all the solar panels I could, because I would want to stay in that business, and I would, shut down my expensive and old and maintenance intensive and whatnot farms and all of that sort of stuff, and get the heck onto this new technology, because there's a lot of money to be made. But I don't think people work like that. And I'm not saying they're evil. I'm not saying they do that because Gina Reinhart's evil or anything like that. I think they're people, like people are people. But I don't think that the decision there is because that is like long term or overall or in like in a net benefit or so, it's a better buck to make. I don't think that's how it works in that sense. I think there are more complicated long term and short term factors at play, and I think, for example, that in many of these cases, what's coming into play is that they don't necessarily not want to get into these new technologies, but that the do you know about the nerve of the giraffe that is like so super long because the neck grew in the wrong way? I don't think that the reason that the giraffe just can't change it is that because the way the system works, is you can't just make this change like that. There's too much involved, and it's really expensive, and it's cheaper to keep running the way it is. And that's what seems to be a big issue there. And I'm not convinced that we're necessarily making good choices or going in a good direction, because we're already developing a long neck similar to the giraffe in terms of the ways that we're using these algorithms. And how are we protecting ourselves against getting a long neck?
So I think it's like chess, when you analyze position, there's this saying, it's not my business, when you I can make is the game and make sacrifice where it's not my pieces. And I think there's no element of that. Someone is making a decision and they don't take the responsibility for that. It's just the decision is made for someone else, and someone else will pay the cost of it. And I think with the example you gave about energy, I think I remember like a couple of years ago there was when someone bought the solar panels, and I think they were saying that the cost of the energy sold was 4 times more expensive than the one that they had to buy from the network. And I think now it's the cost of the 1 kilowatt sold is lower than the one you need to buy from the network. So basically, probably someone on those plants realized that okay, this alternatives, the sources of power, they are losing us money.
And there's also the issue that you can't move it upstream.
To protect our margins, and this is again, this is just that someone is protecting their money.
Are you following along all right? Are we? Because I've been talking about giraffes in a metaphor that might not necessarily translate easily. So are you doing okay?
I understand not everything, but.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just wanted to make sure that you're not feeling excluded. Yeah. I'm not sure how well we can. Maybe energy was not a good example for AI at the same time. I wonder how. Do we have any? It comes. Coming back to your idea that it's not all that new. I wonder whether I'm trying to sort of steelman that idea, and I wonder if that was right. If it's just another steam engine maybe or something like that. How could we look at this in terms of this has all happened before? Like what's not new about this? What is actually the same? What's different? Are there places where we can say no, this has never happened before? Are there things where we can say
I think the area
scale?
where, if you're talking about advertising and marketing, like previously, probably these companies have targeted these ads at the overall general population, but now, like they know a lot about us, and we have like targeted, tailor-made ads. So I think in that sense, they potentially have more manipulative power than what like the ads that are targeted general population.
But back in the day, you just have the TV and you had 5-7 channels, and you're going to get hit by the ads. Like regardless, at least you're getting some,
So I think that's also all happened in the past of the industrial revolution, the steam engine and the other types of engine and electricity. That costs lots of jobs. But when I was watching this, I just realized I think the key to the not disrupting the population is that the change needs to be slow. And I think this is what he was. The example he was giving about the artist photographers actually, I was thinking about also the other day. Now the phones actually make the professional photographer just redundant. Really, you just need to be really creative to be a photographer. And it's showing the market is changing. So
is that true? Because I remember when I first came to Australia, I started taking photos, and my sister had given me an old camera. And it was a decent-ish Canon that went okay. And I can't do that with my phone. It feels like, and I think I figured it out recently what it is. Like this camera, I could actually, because it was a bit chunkier, I could put it down on something and sort of level it in some way, and then it had sort of a basic kind of structure that was in line with gravity and so on, And with the phone, I can just hold it, and I can get away with even making these sounds while I do it. And I can get away with a picture that is like taken from a weird angle, and it's easy to get this angle wrong because the phone is so flat and so easy. And I feel like many pictures taken these days, especially when I do it, are really, really bad. They're incredibly bad, and we're getting used to this mediocrity. It's almost like everyone who has a ukulele is on YouTube, and only a few of them are good. Not everyone is worth listening to, and you see then the latest trends that I heard about is that people are actually recording themselves and then Instagramming their YouTube account. They're speeding up the guitar playing that they were doing yeah, and they're basically faking their own quality as a musician, and that's weird. Yeah, that I find that is just something that I wouldn't have thought would happen. I wouldn't have, not that people have never done this. I did this when I was a kid. I wasn't the most honest kid in primary school. Yeah, sometimes I think we've all done this at some point, but the level at which this happens is somewhat odd. And I'm not sure whether we're just simply taking mediocrity for granted because it's so cheap, and it has this Windows 95 effect. Yeah. Whereas a really good operating system, I don't know if anyone remembers OS2, a really good quality product becomes more expensive in a way because it requires a rarer beast of an expert to make.
I think, yeah, I was like thinking about it, and I think we, over the, especially maybe in recent times, we just traded the quality for quantity. So probably in the past you had quality products. Maybe you had shoes that lasted 5 years or 10, and you had your disposable income was actually spread across those quality things. And you had less things.
Yeah.
Now we need to have devices like the wearable phone, laptop, tablet. So there's much more of the items you can possess. So therefore, maybe the natural consequence of that would be the quality of all these items have to drop to actually for the cost to be for you to be able to purchase all of those quite often unnecessary items.
I think that kind of thing might seem true when we're like, you know, overloaded with things that might be of like lower quality. But when you think about it, think about the jobs that photographers had like before the advent of when everybody had a camera, right? Like, I don't think photographers are really losing any work from like people taking their iPhones around a wedding or anything, you know, because we usually use iPhone cameras for like, same thing we use like disposable cameras for, something for, you know. It's like, it's supposed to be lower quality, whereas like photographers, it's professional work. And you know, when we're talking about if now we just have more quantity and less quality, I don't know if that's truly
I think it's
based on
almost
anything.
forcing humans to be better because we're competing with like AI or phones, so we're actually pushing humans as far as possible.
Yeah, I mean humanity is always being pushed further, you know.
So you have to be better now in some sense, and I think you can still get quality items now. I would say you can get probably better quality items than you could back in the day.
Not necessarily better. It's not pushing people to be better. It's just pushing them to be different, which is not necessarily better.
If you can't be better, then I guess you have to be different.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say that like now there's no way to find something that's as good quality as in the past. I think pretty much overall anywhere you go, there's always something that is at the peak of quality.
Yeah, houses now like built pretty bad compared to the past. So it's like pretty common now. Yeah.
It's like for example, at the peak of the Ford Model T, I think like the really popular one, in today's dollars, it was equivalent to like $2,000 or something like that. Whereas now cars are always much more expensive than that just because the quality is a lot better. You know what I mean?
I think so I'm not
like
sure how much of
overloaded
any of you
cars.
was exposed, but I think there's an element of actually inbuilt failure in the product
100%.
nowadays.
The light bulb. Like the filament.
Yeah, the filament about this light bulb.
That blew my mind when I found out about that years ago. Basically, like light bulbs are meant to last forever, but they break them so you have to buy.
Yeah.
But there's also light bulbs that last longer than they used to, even if you know it's sort of manufactured in the same way.
But it's the underlying notion we're talking about, like these disposable products. Like you're meant to buy the next phone.
Yeah.
You know.
But that's not something that is happening because of AI. That's sort of just
that's absolutely true.
Yeah, we like strayed pretty far off.
Yeah.
No, that's more just like capitalism.
I think one of the things you're getting at is, could you actually even have AI if you didn't have all of these ways to collect data? So if we all basically got rid of our phones today, could you do a human activity sort of recognition? Would you ever get a big enough collection of data to be able to do that?
I mean, there's a lot of incredible stuff going on out there in terms of like collecting data based on city activity. You know, you put sensors in street lights, you can start capturing activity on the streets. I mean, those kind of concepts to like create rich data from like the health of a city and like actually use that in a meaningful way. Like there's so much there, but
And I
commercial
think,
stuff.
I think to your point, I think someone in some conversation hinted that the capture, the I'm a human thing is actually training the autonomous cars. Please note that all the pictures are streets. And it identify the buses, identify the bridge, identify the traffic lights. This is how you participate, as I said, you have a thing, you're training those autonomous cars and you're not being paid.
Well, you're getting a service.
Yeah.
The price you are paying is 10 seconds of your attention of clicking something.
That's the answer, but this is separate. This is coming.
It's more like creative capitalism. Like they're figuring out how to help, like have you work for them sort of for free. You know.
It's not for free.
No, it's not for free. But
No, it's not
I
for
think
free. It's like in exchange.
The difference
for
being,
service.
what would you prefer? The barter system of a bunch of shells versus a loaf of bread or someone painting your house, or a system where you can actually quantify credit the way that your own.
But money is just basically an abstract version of barter.
But it's an abstract version that allows for units and quantification. I wouldn't want to do quantum physics
Cowrie
with
shells.
with a ballpark figure of like h bar. H bar is somewhere around 1
But at
point.
the end of the day,
Let's do
it's just an exchange. It's an exchange of value. The form of the value may be ephemeral, or it might be physical. But at the end of the day, it's just an exchange of value.
The fact that it is ephemeral, the fact that it is untied to anything else, it becomes its own thing, is something that you can then tie things to. And so the way that we can't, I'm still hung up on the fact that we can't do this. The way that you can't tell how much Piotr's time is worth ticking off, because suddenly it becomes all the same, yeah? And whether it is our janitor, and I'm not meaning to degrade people in terms of like their worth or whatever, but me for an hour, I'm a data scientist, I cost a lot more in terms of my economical value than say our cleaning personnel or whatever. But in terms of training the AI, yeah, I have to take time out of my day, however small that may be, to do that, and I'm not remunerated appropriately in those terms because I can't tell whether I am. It's my personal emotional blackmail, if you will, situation that I say, oh, okay, gotta go through with this because I want this thing at the other end. Because I want, like so many of us do, because advertising makes us want. That's its purpose, yeah? And so then we are okay with going through with it because it's just this tiny thing and it just erodes our freedoms and all of that stuff a little bit more, and the capitalism takes over.
But so do you apply that to every expense that you incur? Do you actually say, what am I getting for what I'm spending? So are you...
Pretty much.
It seems like your problem is that you don't know like the dollar value. But like really when you do this thing like watch an ad, you know like your comparative value. You're saying like, okay, so my time is not worth this ad.
But I don't.
Well, so if you don't watch the ad, then that's in exchange for the service.
The thing
it's
is,
like paying.
what I want is not the service. What I want is the thing behind it, right? So when I watch, for example, someone who will want to watch this book club thing, and they just know Eliza, they're awesome, they're probably doing a good thing. Let's watch this book club. And then they watch us discuss this stuff. Yeah, is that going to be worth their time? They don't know that. They don't know what they're getting. They just know that they're getting a
that's
video.
like saying if you go to the movie theater, you pay $8 for a movie you think is going to be good, and then finally it wasn't good.
Yeah.
It's so you have to base your value on preconceived notions all the time. It's basically the same thing. Like you're saying.
In this case, that's the thing. You're not, because you don't know what you're giving them for something that you also don't know what you're getting. So it feels like if I pay $10 for a movie or $25 for a movie, I can decide whether, just by roughly the information that I know about the movie, is it Captain America, is it not, blah, 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 whether that might interest me or not, yeah? But it's kind of like, I don't know if any one of you has ever seen this TV series Stingray in the 80s, where he helps people, and then you owe me. Yeah? That's like, I wouldn't do that. That's not a good idea. Like, what does that mean, I owe you one? Like, to what degree? Do I owe you a favor that can last for 7 years or something? Like, what's...
It's
Thanks for coming to see us. Yeah. So that's the.
I think this has been a bit of an atypical club. As
Oh,
well.
totally. That was the whole idea.
But I think it's not all lost yet, because I think it's probably it's also a matter of awareness of the public of this mechanism and those huge benefits that these companies are getting. Once the public's awareness grows about it, then the usual way will get to the politicians. Politicians will do something potential. That's like a usual path where those things happen. So there's a still chance that maybe your contribution or our contribution will be actually recognized
and also I think this notion of like you paying for the service with whatever data you're providing is kind of opaque, where like you don't know the terms and conditions of it. Let's say I'm putting my let's say I look for an insurance code and then I put in my data in there, and then I don't know if I would get called back or like if my phone number would be used for some other purpose. So like if I think the point that like you paying for what you're using would be valid if you know what's on both sides of the transaction, which is not often the case. And also you turn it off if you don't like, or you turn it off if you don't agree with what's happening is not possible in this day and age. Like how many of us can, no, seriously, I don't like, maybe that's like, I challenge you to turn off your phone, laptop and work for a living without using any of these and feeling that you're behind the society. It's not possible. Like maybe that's possible.
It is possible.
And
I just do that.
But even if you
also like it's more so like for the generations that are coming after us, like they don't know any other way to live apart from living in this digital age.
So just to let you know, this year I had a digital weekend, nothing, no screens, no phone, no iPad, no computer, no nothing for 48 hours. And guess
48
what?
hours out of 365 days.
I know.
Holy crap.
Hey, gotta start.
How did you live?
Gotta start small. But you're saying I can't go 30 seconds.
Working for a living. You said
No,
weekend.
for working, you can't.
Well, that's work.
Like a weekend, like I do that every week.
Yeah.
Like
Then you don't earn money if you choose not to work.
No, that's why we have a government.
Yeah.
So I am being a little bit, so.
I kind of want to say,
if
okay,
you want
boomer.
to, you can go basically go live out in the forest and
No,
go
I'm sorry.
shoot
I
and
have
trap
to.
your own stuff.
Doesn't work.
As
It
an immigrant, I have to know
People
that is
choose to, some people choose to
that
do
is
that.
that is an illusion because I came face to face with that literally when I came here. I'm lucky because I'm white and I'm male, so people are perfectly, like the moment they see me, they assume, oh, I do something useful for a living or something like that. I don't know. It's Australia. Oh, it's incredibly racist. You wouldn't believe it. I was lucky. I came here with €1,000. I cheated. I honestly admit now. Oops. I cheated. I was supposed to bring. I was supposed to bring €3,000. I didn't. I had €1,000. I was lucky. I had friends who helped me, and I stayed at their place, and I worked my way up from there. But people kept saying, because I kept whinging about, like Mervin said, like houses are shit now. Haven't you ever seen Europe, real houses? And have you heard of bricks, man? Things like that. I could whinge about Australian houses and doors and doorknobs for ages. And windows, for fuck's sake, built dark dude. But all of that aside, the phrase, if you don't like it, go, or go home, was thrown at me a couple of times. And I was like, no, I came here to start over. I want to build something new for me. And let me explain. The reason that I'm angry about all of this stuff being shitty is not that I want something better. I want your electricity bill to be lower too, you idiot. But the thing about that is that is not always a choice. Many people don't have that choice. And many people are caught in a life, for example, if you're in a trade job and you're a trade apprentice or whatever, you need a phone. You need to be accessible at all times during your workday. There's no way that you can afford nowadays, and it's almost an extra effort to get a phone that doesn't have all the funky gimmicks. And try not to get something that your friends recommend or that people think will make your life easier, and then you are bombarded with ads for new apps and all of these sorts of things. Try not to slip into that. even if you say, and even if you buy into the idea that you have some kind of control, it is costly. And I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about mental bandwidth. At some point, yeah, you're just running out of juice to resist all of these temptations and constantly be in control, and at some point you're just tired and you click on this thing because it's, which one is, and suddenly you play, I don't know, Best Fiends or Jack in the Box or whatever they're called. Yeah, that happens because we're humans. I think this is a little bit illusory and a little bit sort of idealistic to.
We are all.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there are costs with your choices either way.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the cost of you opting in to using your phone and giving your data away is upsetting you. The option I'm giving you is saying you can basically get rid of your phone, you can assuage your pain there, but it's going to cost you something else, which is you're going to lose connectivity, you're going to lose the ability to reach out to your friends and so on. It's a trade-off that you're talking about. So you've got to make a decision. Are you going to have so much outrage about the fact that you're getting a little bit of your data given away that you're willing to forego the other benefits?
It's not
and
just
that's your choice.
It's not just
when I was like little, there was
it is your choice.
When I was little, there was this motivation for kids, and it was like a going, the intelligent people never get bored. If someone was saying bored. So I think
thank you for coming.
That would be like my response.
Could I provide an alternate point of view on this? I think like we're just in a transition phase now where like neither of you are wrong really actually, but I think
no, I am not.
I think as people become more woke and even like Google saying I don't know, was it Google? They'll say we'll provide.
Thank you.
Google said they'll provide you with what we have. Was that Google? They said you can actually look up what we have on
yeah, there's a few, but like Facebook does that
so it's
too.
becoming more and more, and we're in a transition phase where everyone here obviously knows there's an issue, and then it's becoming more woke, and I think eventually it will be like we'll have more control, and I think you can always pay as well. I guess there's always that option if you don't want the ads, but not all the services provided. Sometimes your friend might send you a video from a social media platform that you're not even interested in. So you have to go to that, then you don't pay to that, then you have to see it. But I guess if you use YouTube all the time, then you could technically get rid of the ads, or you could say what type of ads you want. But I guess there's a preference system for that.
I think maybe also another one of the closing comments is there's this podcast with what's his name, Francois Collet, the author of Chaos.
Oh, right, yeah.
And he was talking lots of those issues that this guy was talking about, so the problem of general intelligence, this singularity. So he was quite skeptical about it, and he also mentioned this, like a religion about it, and questioning the fact that the computers will kill us. It's actually not against the dogma. Yes, I think he was highlighting the fact that currently computers are very good at specific tasks, and he was like also talks about the definition of intelligence. So I think for him it was actually how well you can generalize from the given amount of experience. So if the computer plays equivalent of whatever the 40 million years or whatever the StarCraft was. So I think that's not very efficient use of experience to learn and generalize. That was one of the things, and the other thing was maybe I just didn't get that properly, but he was saying that the intelligence comes, there's like a three elements: intelligence, environment, and something else. I forgot about what that was, but he was saying that they all need to like align. So even in reinforcement learning, if you have like a super intelligent agent, but the environment doesn't change, you cannot like validate that intelligence. So I think he was saying like there's no chance for this super intelligence to run away if there is like a no environment involved that would actually make it valid. So highly recommend that.
Especially what's the name of the podcast? Was it an interview with him or is it his podcast?
I think you will find it on YouTube. So I think it's artificial intelligence with Friedman or something.
Lex Friedman.
Yeah, Lex Friedman. Yeah.
Oh,
and
okay.
then there's this Francois.
Could you put the link onto the Slack channel? In case, for all of you who are not on our Slack channel, please send me your email address and I will invite you to our book club Slack channel. If you want anything more to do with us after today.
But in terms of, because it's book club, books that like came to mind today that were like really relevant, if you're interested, like the AGI, like the singularity and all that stuff, and the conversation where that's heading, Life 3.0 is like, they get right into it.
Yeah.
But then there was we touched on some like really cool concepts in terms of like, you know, what was the original kind of concept of these organization entities. Yuval Noah Harari, he wrote Sapiens and then Homo Deus, both like incredible books. Sapiens goes through like kind of, you know, humans from hunter-gatherers to the agricultural revolution and how these ideas of like religion and just everything, how it evolved, which I thought was really cool. And then his second book, Homo Deus, which is like, what are the moral and ethical implications of our Life 3.0 essentially. Yeah.
And you can basically, I guess, forgo reading the 21 lectures for the 21st century.
Oh, yeah.
If you've read those two books, because he
reiterates it.
It's kind of applying it. I feel. That was my.
And I think just like I know it's like we're repeating all those analogies and examples, but I think we worried about the manipulation from the algorithms and engines, and like then when you think about like Egypt and like thousands years ago, and there were priests that based on stars or something they controlled all the masses of people. Because if you don't do that, there'll be penalty from God. So and that was
one of the ways to persuade everyone was beer.
it was even far more effective than what we have today. So
we could say we're being manipulated the least ever in history because people are telling us weird like myths are truth.
And I think and also you were saying that what about the people that live in times, and like my like a limited sample was that actually I spoke to one of the moms in like Middle Asia, and she said that her children actually are very aware of the manipulation that comes like as a form of influencers, the product placement type of things. So they were actually quite aware of that, and they were
interesting.
So you would have thought that they would be manipulated, but so I think it's the evolution. There is a challenge and there's a response. So.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. Yeah, the kids in
again, it's like the sample is very small, but maybe you look for
who was that?
One way or another.
As I watch a lot of these sort of YouTube video essays and sort of film theory explanations and pop culture, I guess, criticisms and that sort of thing. And one of the videos that I remember seeing was about a movie called 8th Grade, I think. I think it's even like an independent film of some sort. And it's a story of this girl who is living like two lives in parallel, sort of living this sort of Instagram life and living like her own life as a high school student and so on. And I wonder, especially now that you said it, and it's not the first time that I heard it, that sort of the questions to put these things into perspective that I'm asking myself is like, how much are they getting wrong and how much am I getting wrong? In terms of, are we looking at this thinking they see things that we haven't seen before and therefore they are much more aware, but at the same time they are under influences that we haven't been under. So maybe the movie, because it tells a very sad story about her not being able to live up to this ideal that she projects on Instagram and so on. Is that the projection of the suffering that some 30, 40-year-old filmmaker imagines a 14-year-old is going through right now? Or is that a story that is genuinely inspired by maybe their children and their communication with their children? I don't know. I really don't. I have no idea, right? And similarly, the other way around, like when we talk to children now, and I don't understand why my cousins in Adelaide watch someone else play Minecraft. It's
crazy.
I find the game boring. I find the things they do boring.
My nephews, they just sit, watch someone playing games.
And it's just, And
but it's $1 million industry. Like there are these people in meeting rooms, young kids who are getting paid millions of dollars to be sponsored.
You can also say, why do people watch people playing sports?
Yeah,
that's true. But at the same time, it feels different because I can get in my head sort of the idea of a match But these people are just doing wacky shit in these video game worlds. It doesn't even have to
Well,
be.
like why
But I
would
think-
you
I
think
think
that's not a
I
scripted
like-
TV show then, you know?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think
I like your
that's,
comparison.
Yeah.
that
I like
you may not understand the game. It was the
Yeah,
same.
clearly
you already
When I
don't like
didn't know the
Minecraft.
rules of tennis, it was like such a dumb game to me.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
no,
like I don't
was-
know anything about cricket. Like why would I watch that? You know?
Yeah, true. But I was thinking like there's these people watching someone build something and destroy it in Minecraft was like someone watching playing cricket without another team on the field.
Well, no, it's just a different, just a different thing.
But-
Like why would you watch somebody build like an amazing creation?
True, or
You know,
a cooking
you could,
show,
you
I
could
guess.
just
Yeah,
make
it's
the
true.
amazing creation,
Yeah,
but
that's
maybe
right.
you can't.
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't want to because you're just
Yeah.
tired at that moment. You just
Yeah.
want to see somebody else
Yeah.
entertain you. You know what I mean? It's just a different form of entertainment.
If you want a pointless one, unboxing videos.
Yeah.
You know, watching somebody unwrap something. It's
Yeah.
like, well, it's
Well,
not
now,
like
now
they...
we're just doing social commentary. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? There's
I
always
do that.
been
I'm a
like
big
the
watch-
kids these
I'm a big
days in
watch
their
person.
piano.
Gotta watch the watch unboxings.
Watch unboxing.
Yeah, watches.
I
So-
didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
I thought it was literally just sort of toys.
No,
But
no,
people
yeah,
unbox everything.
Everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that just goes to show that people have very diverse things that they find entertaining, and that maybe that's a good thing about our modern society.
Interesting, because I remember what were they called? I can't remember, but there are these channels that watch movies, and you don't watch the movie; you watch the people watching the movie. And to me,
reaction too.
yeah,
Goggle TV, Goggle
Like
Box.
Goggle.
God was, yeah, but that to me felt like a rather sad, I found, version of social anxiety taking hold in larger society, because it felt like these people want friends that are safe. Yeah, like we're sitting next to each other. I've never met you, and you're perfectly okay to say things I don't like. I've met Andrew before, and he has the freedom to say things I don't like. And then
But I think
No,
because he said enough things that you like him.
No. What I mean is, the issue behind that is mine. Like if I don't like something that you say, that's my problem. That's not your issue, unless you want me to desperately like yours. I don't know, right? And that's it. But and I think it feels to me like we are in some sense often taking the easy way out, and when we're engaging this way with media, and we're sort of having these sort of proxy friends in this kind of way. And I'm not saying that all the game watchers and so on are like that, but when we watch movies with people that we can easily switch off when it becomes uncomfortable, or friends that we can put on hold.
You could
I
say the
wonder-
same thing about like
something-
radio show, morning radio show people. It's the exact same thing.
So I think
It's like, they're going to discuss a thing you're discussing with your friend.
maybe
but
it
you
will
don't know.
help you
Yeah.
understand yourself. So I think previously you were referring to the amount of resistance, and I think once you understand there's a limited amount of resistance that you can put, and
I'm sorry, I don't get the.
so I think so previously we were saying that you were being bombarded with recommendation or something.
Yeah.
And you could there's a certain point when you cannot resist it anymore and you follow what is being told to you. So I think once you realize that there is in all aspects of life there's this limited amount of resistance that you can put, and if you allocate it in work, and then there will be less for social interactions like on social media.
Yeah.
When you realize that may actually
Sort of
help
like
you.
it's like the riot and rebuilding kind of process. Like if people, like enough people just don't like it, then a new system will be created that will suit. Because I mean, there's a lot of people like that don't like ads, and then a new systems or new ways will be created to sort of evolve. But then it'll happen for a while. Ads will be there, and then people will resist, and there's something new will be created. I'm guessing. I don't know what will be
But
created.
the fact that this type of model exists for so long, that just goes to show that people prefer to watch an ad rather than pay.
Yeah,
You know what I
that's
mean?
true.
They
Yeah.
value, in that type of situation, they value their time less than their money.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're like kids who don't have money, you know what I mean? It all depends on like the situation and context.
Do you think like now, because TV had ads for like a long period, I felt, but now it's like ads are getting smaller and smaller. I guess.
Yeah.
So
I feel like
they
this
will always be
human
around.
life
Yeah.
I think
is rising, you know what I mean?
And then I'm thinking like, what is TV?
That's in.
No, I think there's this in my life.
I mean, TV
there's
from
re-
10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I
No,
understand
TV
that,
still
but
has that.
Yeah,
now
yeah.
you can live with the internet only. You don't need a TV. Really.
Yeah. That's true.
Maybe that's I think you made an interesting point, because when you watch these ads on YouTube, there are some interesting things about it. It's not, I don't only hate it. I sometimes look at it and wonder how it works, and I then continue to hate it. And sort of a really good ad would bring across its point in the first 5 seconds when there's a chance for you to switch it off, right?
Yeah.
So you sometimes see these ads that just don't get it. Like they're old school thinking in advertising, and they need this, and suddenly you don't even know which product's advertised, and you've already, And on the other hand, you see these ads, and I hate Google so much for this stupid song that's just stuck in my head, but hey, how clever is that, The song ends, like the last line that you hear, you know that's not even the verse of it, I gotta have it, That's the last line that you hear before you get to switch it off. That is so clever.
That's just psychology. I mean, they always had these psychology tricks in
I don't think they're always the same.
They're different, but it's like it's a similar strategy. They catch you with what they can. They take the most advantage of the medium to hook you.
So, because jingles have been around since the days of radio. So
we all know millions of jingles for corporations.
While true, a lot of the jingles that we know for corporations were adapted, like back in the day, were adapted from popular pop songs.
Not always.
But now you could, in theory, right? You could A/B test jingles and so on, and you could really make. And I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that there's already AI walking amongst us, and its name is Max Martin, because that guy has produced some of the most successful pop songs in history.
He cracked the code.
He definitely did. And all you need is an AI that does that, right? And then you're just a bag of emotions and hormones, right? You're just reacting to this thing.
So now the difference is that there's an algorithm exploiting us rather than people. But if we're being exploited on our end, it's kind of the same, is it not?
I don't think so, because it's one thing to be exploited to, say, if you will, 10%. Because the way I look at it is that every exploitation, to resist every exploitation, costs you a certain amount of. Do you know the spoon theory kind of thing? No. It's a theory from, I think, when people talk about disability, especially mental illness and so on, they talk about having a handful of spoons in the morning, and every action costs you a spoon.
I think that's what I was trying to say.
When you run out of spoons, you can't do anything anymore. That's it. That's your day gone. And you don't get to decide how many spoons you have at the beginning of the day, and you don't get to decide what takes away spoons. And so, similarly, every ad takes a bit of a spoon, And so, as these ads get better and better and better, to resist them takes more spoons.
Okay, so what you're saying. But that's already been happening.
I'm not saying. But the thing is, it makes a difference. It makes a difference whether you're taking a tenth of a spoon or half a spoon per ad. And I think as we crank up the algorithm, humans don't get more spoons. That would be fair in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like if we were handed more spoons, then I would be totally okay with more ads in return. But the ads get cranked up, and we get more taken away. But in return, we don't get more spoons. We don't get more things that cost. We only get more things that cost us more spoons.
But that's the whatever you just said. It has been being cranked up ever since the Industrial Revolution, when marketing began. Like you were saying, there used to be these long things of tests trying to tell you why the thing is good, and then probably even in the 50s, just psychological things, jingles and just repetition.
Would you agree that it makes a difference whether this went on linearly or went exponentially?
Whether it makes a difference
to us as consumers.
I mean, it just affects the rate at which it takes away our spoons, right?
But it would also affect the rate at which we might adjust to it.
I was going to play devil's advocate and be just like he touched on, that exponential learning growth, but in reality, the bar could be so high that it's not relative. For us, we're infinitely adaptable. So you could argue they can crank it up and we'll keep adapting.
Yeah, it's true. It's like every generation thinks the next generation's thing is like the devil, but it always ends humanity has never really been going backwards.
Recommender systems, they can be manipulated. In Amazon's classic example, fake reviews, getting other people to like it and all this other stuff. And the humans have worked out, once they work out how the algorithm works, they will then work to their best advantage.
But then there's what's crazy is, with OpenAI, they released
GPT-2?
The NLP was basically the text generation, and it was they didn't want to release it because it's going to be used for but the underlying notion of that content generation is huge and can sway anything. You talk about review products, you don't talk about fake news, fine, that's an easy one, but just anything, there's ways to gamify all algorithms, right? Image classification, you can have a human standing here, and then another human standing here, but holding a little image that will just mess up the general adversarial network, whatever it is. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, just modern problems require modern solutions, like the meme says.
Yeah. There was this interesting. I forgot the name of the. There was a conference recently. I forgot the name of it, and that conference they had one of the services they offered at this conference was to take a picture of you and make an adversarial print on your T-shirt for your face.
Nice.
I thought it was a brilliant idea. That's really cool. Yeah. So these kinds of things. I think they kind of put the not the choice so much back, but it's a sweetening of the whole interaction because you feel like it's not just going one way. There's actually so much interaction of all the things that are happening. Yeah, but I feel we don't. It feels to me like we don't see enough of it. It feels to me like there's a lot of.
It's too behind the curtain kind of thing. Or?
It feels a lot like It feels a lot like Wizard of Oz kind of. Yeah, because like you said, it's not. I think we were talking about it when we that on Netflix. I don't have the feeling that the recommender algorithm is manipulating me much. Actually, I feel like there's nothing on it. I'm scrolling like crazy. I spent 10-15 minutes scrolling.
That gets into the concept of paralysis of choice, right? There's too much option. Because he said, it's just trying to distract you from the fact that there's nothing good to watch.
But I know exactly what I'm looking for.
Things to watch on Netflix.
And the thing is that there were, like, for example, I watch pretty much only sci-fi and fantasy shows and like supernatural or crime drama kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the latter are kind of sort of secondary choices, and so I was scrolling through Prime to find something sci-fi that I hadn't seen before. And turns out they bought some weird show from the mid-90s, just cheaply redone the CGI effects and sold it as a new sci-fi show. And I was wondering why it was in 4:3, and I was like, wow, that looks a bit odd. Oh god, the dialogue was so bad. Oh,
yeah, but I agree with him on Netflix.
Yeah.
For me, it's the recommendation. It's like every category you click on, it kind of shows like 80% of the list may be the same. It's just reshuffled order, and it's like you're going in the same loop over and over, and you're waiting for the gem, something different to show up. Certain iteration comes up.
And that's because the recommendation system thinks it knows you, but you're looking for that little bit extra.
Yeah, and I think,
but it feels like it doesn't.
But I think there is this feeling there is nothing in it, and there's an opposite on YouTube. YouTube has like plenty of content. But it shows you all over the same thing. There's very little.
There's no feedback. That's the problem. The problem is like, okay, you've watched this. They probably actually do that with YouTube. They can do that. But in general, the idea that like you've bought a product, let's acknowledge that. Let's start branching out and offering you something else rather than just like, oh, you searched for this, you bought this, but let's just keep showing.
So are you guys complaining that the recommender algorithms aren't good?
No. So I'm saying that on Netflix there's no
the content isn't good.
Lack of content.
But I mean,
the lack of content.
Yes,
that
I think
means effectively the recommender does not have a lot.
Yes, I'm saying on Netflix there's lack of content, and recommender shows the same thing. And YouTube there's lots of content, but still recommender is very limited.
I'm quite happy with the YouTube.
I don't know if you follow like the Netflix engineering team. They're absolute guns, and they're releasing a lot of really good open source of like their pipelines and stuff.
Where do you follow them?
They've got their own blog and they release it all. Yeah, it's awesome. But one thing in terms of recommendation systems is like they've gone so deep that it's not even like we're going to recommend you something that you've watched and we're going to recommend you something else. They've started doing recommendations on the artwork. So you're watching a whole bunch of shows. They're going to actually show you not only like a show that you want to watch, but actually take a scene out that you're most likely to engage with, which I thought was
like if
really
you watch romantic comedies, they'll show you a different clip from The Office than if you watch just
See, in that sense, probably it's different. Like you've been telling that we've had marketing and advertising and targeting for a while, but
it's
like
6:15. I actually have to run because my wife and I are getting a doula meeting tonight. So Soria is working for Eliza, so feel free to eat the pizza, have another beer if that's okay with you. Feel free to. You don't have to run. I've just got to run off now.
Do you have me to Slack? What's your?
What I really want
sure.
is an anti-recommender. Just tell me the thing that is furthest away from what you think I like.
It's the optimization should be like put a high cost on something that's most likely recommended to me.
Yeah.
Thank you, internet for watching, and I hope to see you next week when we're back to normal.